I'm glad you stopped by for me. I've been wanting to talk to you.
Yeah, sure, kid.
Where to?
You just go to River Street, and I'll tell you where to stop.
The director of the film, Elia Kazan, has never taken much credit for that extraordinarily memorable scene. He said, I just stepped back and these two actors did it.
You don't mean that you're thinking of testifying against some people that we might know?
I don't know, Charlie. I mean, I'm telling you, I don't know, Charlie. That's what I want to talk to you about.
Listen, Terry, you know how much those piers are worth that we control through the local?
The best way to describe that scene is you had two people in combat. Also, while we were together, there was some kind of a chemistry between us.
Before we get to where, Charlie?
Terry, take the job. Just take it. No questions, take it.
Everything in the movie was compressed, so to speak, into that scene. And then what makes it so extraordinary is the choices. The choices that were made by Brando and by Steiger and by Kazan in that scene are amazing.
Brando demonstrates just about everything that you could possibly ever want to see an actor do.
You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody.
Elia Kazan believes that On the Waterfront is one of his finest films. He doesn't call it great, but it meant a great deal to him to do this movie because it was about betrayal. It was about, in a way, people think it was a kind of reflection of what he had gone through when he named names, although he says it wasn't. But in any event, what it meant to him was, I think, more than anything, was to do a picture with Brando about a man who has a conscience and who lives up to his beliefs and his values, and I think this was very important to Kazan.
I really got to do On the Waterfront because of a thing I did on television called Marty. Kazan heard about it. He said, well, you go read with Bud Schulberg the taxi scene in this thing called On the Waterfront because Schulberg wrote it, and if he likes you, you can play Marlon Brando's brother. Well, I had just seen Mr. Brando 2 weeks before in Streetcar, named Desire, in which he was absolutely brilliant. So I was a nervous wreck. And anyway, I read, and Schulberg's liked me, and I got to do it.
I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody. Instead of a bum, which is what I am. Let's face it. It was you, Charlie.
This scene had so many wonderful elements because you felt you were there at a moment when two brothers were confronting each other in a way that one shouldn't really be privy to.
Two men, brothers, in a fundamental relationship, discussing the core issue of the film, which is whether or not he will cooperate with the government and, in the opinion of Rod Steiger's character, Lee Cobb's character, rat on his fellow longshoreman, or will go along with the way things are on the waterfront.
That's $200, $300, $400 a week. $400 a week just for the openers.
I get all that dough for not doing nothing.
You don't do anything, and you don't say anything. You understand?
The desperation and the crux of my character is, he says, when Marlon's character says, well, I can't make up my mind, and I say, you better make up your mind before we go to 564 so-and-so street. And it's all out. It's all been revealed. And he knows now, you know, my brother knows that I have almost become a traitor to him, who I love dearly, you know.
I'm telling you, I haven't made up my mind yet.
Well, make up your mind before we get to 437 River Street.
Before we get to where, Charlie?
I'm trying to do the impossible, which is to convince my brother, who is right, to do something wrong, to the point that I take a gun out. And only when I take the gun out and see the gun in my hand, and he pushes it down with his hand, do I realize how much these ambitious dreams have poisoned my relationship to my own brother even. And thank God I did, otherwise I would have shot him.
What Steiger does is takes from Brando the fact that Brando refuses to be either intimidated or angered by that gun. And when that happens, Charley is completely disarmed, not just by the fact of the gun, but he's disarmed emotionally. And you notice what he does in the scene? He sits back. And for the rest of the scene, he more or less sits back staring into the future. The future, of course, includes his death now, because he can't deliver. And his performance is as remarkable as Marlon's, and as truthful as Marlon's, and I'm sure it came from Marlon, just as Marlon's performance came from Steiger.
How much you weigh, Slicker? When you weighed 168 pounds, you were beautiful. You could have been another Billy Conn.
The choices that were made by Brando and by Steiger and by Kazan in that scene are amazing. Think about the scene for a moment. It could have been a typical scene of gangster conflict. Brother pulls a gun, says, "You're not going to testify." He says, "I don't know if I'm going to testify now." They could have fought each other in that little back seat, and it would have been like every scene you've ever seen on that subject. Instead, it was like no scene you've ever seen on that subject. What was it? It was a love scene. It was a scene about a failed love, about a lost love. When Rod pulls the gun and points it at his brother, what does Marlon do? Every other actor alive would have made a different choice. He would have pushed it away. He would have argued with him. He would have been angered at him. He would have been furious. What does Marlon do? He takes the gun as he would take Eva Marie Saint's hand in a love scene and pushes it away. He says, "Oh, Charlie."
Terry, take this job, please.
Charley.
Please take it.
Charley.
And when he says, "Oh, Charlie," it is heartbreak, not anger. It's the loss of this relationship, which is the only thing this poor, beaten man had left. And he pushes it away.
It's heartbreaking because it's about a guy, a young boy who looked up to his older brother, the way in which all human beings look up to someone to guide them, to protect them, to look after them, to teach them, and then are disappointed by them.
You was my brother, Charlie. You should have looked out for me a little bit. You should have taken care of me just a little bit so I wouldn't have to take them dives for the short-end money.
Well, I had some bets down for you. You saw some money.
You don't understand. I could have had class.
They are saying things to each other, or at least Terry, Marlon's character, is saying things that he's never said before. He could have been somebody. No, it was you, Charlie. It was you. I mean, that kind of an accusation, that kind of stuff coming up from his insides, basically saying, "You ruined my life. I trusted you and you let me down." And that's an enormously meaningful moment, particularly when played by two rather exceptional actors.
The love of a brother conquered. And there's no doubt that behind it all was the love of his brother, otherwise he would have shot him. Because what happens, what does it mean when he doesn't shoot him? He's gonna get killed. He knows that. So if you want to talk about how much you can love a brother, that's about as far as you can go. That kind of love, yeah. And you find him hanging on a hook later on, my character. And he knew it. And there was no way he could get away, you know. So if you want to say it was a sacrifice of brotherly love,
Okay. I tell him I couldn't find you.
It's a perfectly written film, of course, by Schulberg. But in that scene, you see one of the greatest examples on film or on stage that I know of two actors and a director making choices that are unique to them, that are unforgettable, and that have made, imagine, a 4-minute scene, one of the most famous moments in the history of acting.
Here. You take this. You're gonna need it.
You pull over.
Now we come on the set and there's half a taxi, so the camera can shoot from the front and back. And a steering wheel in the seat for the taxi driver and us in the back. And Kazan and Spiegel are at it. Kazan said, I can't shoot the bloody thing. So what am I going to do? There's no back projection. I can't go in. You look right out and you see the studio wall in back of the taxi. Because we were in the studio about 20 by 20. Put your hands out, you touch the wall.
Sam Spiegel was being a cheapskate, and he did not get a real cab for the two actors to act in. And so they had to kind of improvise with kind of an old, part of a cab, and then they used lighting to make it seem as if they were really driving along a road.
And of course, Spiegel saying, Gutch, please, Gutch, darling, with your talent, darling, you can do this, He said, never mind that crap. I can't do it. And a guy, one of the men who worked on the film said, I came in a taxi this morning that had a Venetian blind. And Kazan screamed, get me a Venetian blind. And they got a Venetian blind and they cut it to fix the back window.
Apparently the rear screen projection didn't show up, and which means, the traffic in the streets and the cars. So the scene would have been a much brighter scene had the light from the outside been coming into the taxi. Kazan put a Venetian blind in the back window, which closed off the outside world. Now, how many times have you seen a New York or New Jersey taxi cab with a Venetian blind blocking out the back window? Taxi cabs are open. People can jump out the door. People, and there's life going on outside. So when you have a Venetian blind closed, dark, and the taxi cab having this kind of pressure cooker feeling with this incredibly deep and meaningful conversation between two brothers. So all of that added to that scene. It created a much greater intimacy than would ordinarily take place in a taxi cab.
Every 100 pounds that goes out.
Excepting that's a specific taxi cab. We must know that at the end of the scene, because the guy who's driving it is going to take Rod Steiger on a one-way trip.
Take me to the garden.
Kazan, he said, gee, we had this little, half a taxi cab, so you get the camera in. And the stagehands were just kind of rocking it, and there were some lights that Boris Kaufman arranged that sort of looked like headlights going past occasionally. He said, I just stepped back and these two actors did it. Kazan is not a notably modest guy. I suspect that's the truth of the matter, that this thing just got going and those two guys just ripped.
All right, you think that Johnny's going to jeopardize the whole setup for one rubber-lipped ex-tanker who's walking on his heels? What the?
Been better.
That's not the point.
I could have been a lot better,
The
Charlie.
point is we don't have much time.
Kazan described it, I found out later, he said, it was wonderful to watch these two young bulls locking horns. He's a bit of a sadist. He couldn't wait to see what one is going to pull out for the other, right?
Probably Steiger gets less credit for it than Brando, and that there may be sort of unfairness in that. The responsiveness of Steiger to Brando is very significant. He is really giving him the things that he needs, not just as an actor, as a character, to play the scene.
Steiger's choices were right. He could, when his brother refused to cooperate with the mob, have been threatening. It could have looked like a Jimmy Cagney scene. Jimmy Cagney's an okay actor, nothing wrong with him. But it would have been different. But what he got from Marlon, he used. Marlon's sorrow, when he began it with, oh, Charlie, immediately caught Steiger.
Oh, Charlie. Wow.
Look, kid. Look, kid.
I got in the cab. I was a nervous wreck. We started to roll. They said action. We started to shoot the scene, and he says, what do you think of the Yankees? That's not in the script. but we both come from the same kind of training. I said, well, maybe he's leading up to something. I said, I think they're all right. He said, well, I was wondering how they do. I said, well, I don't know. You know, I don't understand you. And when you're in a situation like that, you merely have to say what you're thinking within the framework of what the playwright has created. I said, I don't understand you, which was true. Our father, we came from Brooklyn, if you remember, and he used to break our rear ends to go see the Dodgers. We got sick of eating too many hot dogs. Cut. Okay, now I'm a nervous wreck. I said, well, maybe he's looking for something. I don't know. So he says, they roll again, and he says, well, how's Mom? That's not in the script either.
Brando had disagreed with certain things in the scene, and that's why he was improvising so much. And finally, he and Schulberg supposedly did have a talk where he told him why he disagreed with certain things about the scene, and one of them was he didn't feel that he could talk to his brother calmly with a gun stuck beneath his ribs. So Kazan told him, do something, improvise on that, and he did by gently pushing the gun away and saying, oh, Charlie.
Then I remember Kazan's voice saying, Buddy, stop the crap. Buddy was Marlon's name for close friends, was Buddy. And then we shot. We did a two-shot, which means the both of us. Then they did a shot over my shoulder on him during the scene. Then they turned around and they're going to do a shot over his shoulder on me doing the scene. And I'm sitting there and said, what happened? And Kazan said, I let Marlon go home. He said he was tired. Had to see an analyst. Well, I couldn't believe this because this is probably the worst thing you could do to a so-called colleague, you know. And I was tears in my eyes almost, because also at that time one of our strongest father images was Elia Kazan. And I couldn't believe. So I did the scene with the continuity guy, Guy Tomajon was his name, reading Marlon's part.
Steiger never knew that he was leaving for the analyst appointment. He'd left every afternoon at 4 o'clock to see a shrink, and I think it got Steiger pretty angry at the time.
I think if I have to be honest about it, which I hope I am, what happened then was, you son of a bitch, I got a little bit of talent, I'll show you too. And I did my part.
It could have been another Billy Kahn. Skunk, we got you for the manager. He brought you along too fast.
Here is a classic example, in my mind, of one of the greatest sources of creativity, which is terror. You're frightened to death, you cannot do it. And if you have some kind of talent, somehow you do it, and not only that, but all the energy of fear gets into an energy of creating, and you do it made it better than you could have ever done in your life. Now, maybe that's what happened to me in the back of the taxi. I was lost, frightened, hurt, embarrassed, but I had to do it. So he might have helped me by going. I mean, I wish he stayed there, because we might have found a lot of other things.
It was an unhappy experience for him in many ways. He was going through a lot. His mother had died recently. He was deep in analysis. He was very depressed. He didn't think he was very good, you know. He did not like himself in this movie when he first saw it. Kazan showed a rough cut of the movie to Leonard Bernstein, who was going to do the score, and he asked Brando and Carl Malden to come and watch. And during the movie, Sam Spiegel was constantly saying, you know, it's not very good. It could be much better. And Kazan was saying, it's great, it's wonderful, shut up. And Brando didn't say anything. And when it was over, he left without commenting. And Carl Malden ran after him and said, what do you think? Don't you think it's great? And Brando said, in and out, in and out. He did not think he was that good. He never did.
The thing that really makes, in some ways, Brando so extraordinary is that he is, on the one hand, the ultimate male, macho, tough guy. And on the other hand, he is the ultimate female. He is so soft and sweet and vulnerable. And he manages to keep the male and female going at the same time throughout the movie and throughout the performance. And that's a balancing act that is so hard to do.
You gotta get a little fun out of life.
Periodically, Marlon calls me to tell me he doesn't want to be on Inside the Actors Studio because he won't do television. And we talk for 45 minutes. They're wonderful phone calls, but I was asking, why are you calling me if you don't want to be on it? Anyway, we talk. And at one point he said to me, why do you want me on Inside the Actors Studio? And I said, do you want an honest answer? He said, of course. I said, because you're the best actor I've ever seen in my life. And I said, I'm not talking about the movie Streetcar and On the Waterfront and Viva Zapata. I saw you on the stage in Streetcar. I saw you in Truck Line Cafe. I saw you in your first Broadway appearance in I Remember Mama. And I said, during the first act, I was very nervous. All of us were in the audience. I thought, this guy doesn't know his lines. Something's wrong. He's not like the rest of the cast. But no, during the third act, I decided something's going on. This is the beginning of a new kind of acting. That was the first time I saw Marlon Brando.
Both actors were trained at the Actors Studio, which, by the way, Kazan started. And one of the tenets of that sort of training, which was the method as it was derived from the Moscow Arts Theater started by Konstantin Stanislavski, is that you always do everything as an actor within the given circumstances that you are presented with in the material.
One of the most important aspects of method acting is the attempt to be as real and truthful to the individual self. It's a revolt against layering on some surface element that is somehow not genuine. Another aspect that all schools of the method or the Stanislavski system use are various forms of improvisation. They're very open to the accident of the moment. There is a scene in On the Waterfront that illustrates this very well. A scene between Marlon Brando and Eva Marie Saint, where he's walking with her and clearly interested in her, and at some point she accidentally dropped a pair of gloves she was holding. And he picks up the gloves, and before he hands them back to her, he's handling them. He even puts his hand in them. And suddenly this simple little action becomes very revealing of his feelings towards her, some aspects of his own personality, the tough outer guy and the sensitivity within. And when Elia Kazan was questioned about the brilliance of putting this in, he said, the only thing I could get credit for was knowing not to call cut when it happened. But he knew Brando would make something interesting of it. And this was his way of working with Marlon Brando. He gave him a lot of credit and invested a lot in his own insights into what he was doing.
Kazan loved the fact that he was doing it on location, on the waterfront. He loved doing things on location because it was real, it was gritty, it was, the weather was terrible. He was glad, actually, that it was so cold because he said it made the actors seem more human. They were freezing cold.
Kazan recognized in Schulberg and Schulberg in Kazan the possibility of that kind of collaboration, where Kazan could design a movie as a director that was perfectly crafted to the way in which Schulberg was writing, the way in which he wrote On the Waterfront, that spare but often poetic dialogue. And the result is this nearly perfect motion picture in which there is an absolute harmony between the intentions of the playwright, in this case the screenwriter, the overall direction of the director, Kazan, and the in-the-moment belief of every second, every frame of this film by the actors.